I just want to go back to the question of, please tell us about who's actually running this planet. Is it the reptilians?
I forgot.
What's going
right,
on?
Okay, here we go. Who's running the planet? The Anunnaki are part of the picture. The Anunnaki are an interesting bunch of people, and there's a lot which I don't know about them. And these seem to be a good example of what I was talking about a little earlier in this conversation. That rather than saying, oh my God, these are people we've got to worship, or we've got to fight, or we've got to propitiate to, or we've got to, we've got to appease, or we've got to negotiate with, actually maybe there are people who came here with a problem. And there is information from different sources, including some of my own information, which feels real, and I've heard this elsewhere, is that they may have lost their planet. And for a race to have lost their planet, because bad things happen out there, it's a violent universe. For any race of beings, any advanced race of beings that lose a planet, that's a tough problem to solve. Because it's like somebody losing their house in an earthquake and then wandering around wondering wherever they can live. They think, oh, that's a nice house and that's a nice house, but everyone's already living in the nice houses. Now this is a very poor analogy. You can't just wander into a beautiful empty house. All the beautiful planets have already occupied. They've already got people or beings who seem to be there. Now it's possible, and I present this as a hypothesis. It may be that they're working through their own karmic history as a race. Just supposing a planet was destroyed, then the race had nowhere to go. But because they hadn't been very nice to people before that, nobody wants to take them on board as refugees. Then they've got a problem. One of the things that Clay and Sean Pickering said, now they don't know anything about the Anunnaki, this is highly compartmentalized. I think that at least some of the Anunnaki, or the people who are called the Anunnaki, are reptilians. And remember that the word Anunnaki, as translated by Sitchin, simply means those who came from heaven to earth. It's like a generic term for extraterrestrials, really, visitors. They don't call themselves the Anunnaki. I don't know what they call themselves. It's possible that these are refugees looking for a place to squat, a place to take over, people to negotiate with, a role to play, a place to be. I don't know. If we imagine that there's a race that lost their planet, they're likely to be heavily traumatized. They're likely to be split into different groups. They're likely to have disagreements between themselves about what they should do. Some of those people might say, okay, we should ask for help. Others might say, no, we're a warrior race. We just go and invade those people. We have no respect for them anyway, and besides, we like their real estate. We've been told that the Anunnaki have split into a number of different factions. And actually they don't necessarily get along well with each other. Some of them may well be friendly. Some of them may not be. I met Barbara Lamb, who is a therapist who works with contactees. She's widely respected. She's a wonderful person. I met her in Los Angeles in February. And she told me that a reptilian had materialized in her room physically, held her hand for 2 minutes, looked her in the eye, and gave her the information that he had been bred as part of a program to communicate with people, chosen people, with the message that they are not all unfriendly. That was his role. And Barbara Lamb understood this because she's heard all of these stories. You know, just because somebody's 8 feet tall with muscles and scales and greens, I mean, I don't know what they look like. You know, they probably look pretty frightening. But that doesn't mean to say that they're not nice people. As Ruth said, the bottom line, once you disentangle all of this mess that we've got down here at this level of reality, everyone is infinite consciousness. Even a nasty reptilian who eats babies. You know, they're infinite consciousness too. They've just forgotten who they are, just like you and I have, maybe. And so there's room for compassion in this. This is where the infinite love thing fits in. See, there's room for compassion. There's room for realizing that these guys might have a big problem. But most people who do something that is antisocial or violent or nasty, they're just trying to solve a problem. If somebody holds you up at knife point down a dark alley and steals your wallet, they're just trying to solve a problem. If somebody bombs another country, they're just trying to solve a problem. If somebody takes over a planet, they're just trying to solve a problem. You know, if your partner screams at you and or throws a plate at you in the kitchen because they're upset, they're just trying to solve a problem. They're just self-medicating by doing something that makes them feel better. And so any bad thing that anyone ever does is they're trying to solve a problem. It's just that usually when these things result in a way in a negative effect on somebody else, it doesn't really finally solve the problem. It's just very temporary. It just feels like they're solving a problem. It doesn't actually end the whole thing. This is what karma is. Karma is trying to solve a problem in a way that creates another problem, creates another problem, creates another problem, creates another problem, and the whole thing never ends. You've got to lift yourself up to a higher level to realize how to really handle these problems, not try and solve them by a reactive act. So much about that. But this is where compassion comes into this, that rather than fighting these guys, we've got to understand that they may be here because they're trying to solve a problem, and they're trying to solve a problem in a way that might not be good for their karma and might not be good for us physically. Now, you asked me who's running the show. It's certainly very real for me that there are reptilian entities who are operating behind or operating within senior figures who are influential in this whole chess game that is modern geopolitics, and also in the alternative media world as well. If you've got reptilians who are smart enough to take over a human body in whatever metaphorical way you can imagine, they might stand behind them in another dimension, there might be what is called a walk-in, where they say, okay, out of here, I'm taking over this body now. And they look like a human, but but who they were before that was something completely different. This can happen at any stage of one's life. You don't have to be born in here. That may happen with politicians, it may happen with bankers, it might happen with industrialists, it might happen with UFO researchers. In theory, if we don't watch our backs, it could happen to you and me. You know, these are the kind of things which, if you regard these beings as having the ability and the strategic capability to figure out, okay, what position should we occupy on this chessboard? Then they are going to be occupying positions, and they're going to be occupying people. It's absolutely logical that if they could do that, they would do that. You know? And not only are the bad guys occupying positions and occupying people, the good guys are occupying positions and occupying people. Who do you think we are? You know. Now this is all part of your question about who's running the planet. Behind the scenes here, there is an invisible game going on. I won't use the word war. There are good aliens and there are bad aliens, and they're very, very probably occupying human conditions and playing things out. And they're probably hunting each other. And when Bob Dean said that there are human-looking aliens walking the halls of the Pentagon, and some of them are being hunted, which is what we were told by our source, who we call John. What do we call him? John Roby. John Roby, who's a character in a movie, because we like calling our pseudonyms characters in movies. He was Tony Dodd, who is now passed on, the very well-known British UFO researcher. very widely respected. He's a wonderful man. I never met him personally. He communicated to us quite intensely. He says these guys are being hunted down. What he never told us, specifically, probably because he never knew, is it the good guys who are being hunted down by the bad guys, and the bad guys who are being hunted down by the good guys? You see?
The bad guys are being hunted down by the good guys.
Or the other way around, or possibly both. You know, who knows what's going on out there? It's just the idea that when Tony Dodd reported on our scientist John Roby and confirmed by Bob Dean, saying that there is one race, this is pretty much what Bob Dean said from memory. He said that there is one race which he has been told about that looks exactly like us. You wouldn't notice them if they sat next to you in a train. You know, you'd never notice them if you met them at a party. You'd never notice them if you were working for them or with them, or had them working for you, or if they applied for a job in military intelligence. You know, you wouldn't notice. They're just human. And bridging slightly over to that, this is something that Henry Deacon, Arthur Neumann, said over and over again. He said, they're humans. They're people out there. They're just like us. Some of them look a little bit different, some of them have slightly different skin, some of them are big, some of them are small, some of them have got different shaped eyes, but hell, we have that on planet Earth as well. Why do you think we all look so different? It's because we've got genetic components from all these other different races, and they're all slightly different, but fundamentally, maybe with the odd exception, you know, they've all got 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, 2 ears, 2 eyes, a nose and a mouth. And a brain that's up here, and they've got their own chakra system, and they've got their own biology. But they're pretty much human. It seems to be the template for this galaxy, at least, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions. And if some of those humans are so similar to us that you couldn't tell the difference, I'm sure they're here. They're probably very brave volunteers doing their own thing. And if any one of those is watching this video, come contact us because we'd like to interview you.
I personally want to interview a reptilian, if they can speak.
Yeah, you probably have to have an intermediary to pick up their telepathic contact. One of the things, going back to, no, this whole thing isn't going in a straight line, but what Clay and Sean Pickering told us was that the disclosure which they have been, the disclosure program which they have been told about by their US Navy source in great detail concerns 2 extraterrestrial races. They didn't know about any of the others. They said, nobody knows what the Greys are doing. They're doing their own thing. Henry Deacon told us that. They said, we don't know what those guys are doing. They're doing their own thing. Quite interesting. He talked about a reptilian race who are subservient to another race, which is a silicon-based life form that is not humanoid, that has got tremendous abilities, but is so alien in every sense of the word that it's really hard to understand what it is that they want, how they operate, what they're, you know, anything about them at all, because it's a totally different paradigm. They're just crystals. They're crystals, basically. They're crystals that can apparently move and levitate and communicate telepathically, and they can change their shape because just like you'd imagine a big clever crystal would, it just grows something outside of it, which is another part of the crystal. I don't know much about this, and it's a very wild story. And they don't like the environment of planet Earth because it doesn't suit their bodies very well. And so this is a novelty in terms of UFO researchers, in terms of UFO research. And they've had a bit of a tough time with their story because everyone says, oh, this is crazy, this is nonsense. So they don't have many people who are believing them. And but their source, their US Navy source, is part of a team of 6 who has been surgically modified, which apparently is quite a traumatic process. It's been surgically modified to be able to communicate with these beings. And he's had deep interaction with them. But one of the reasons why there are debates about whether to trust them or not is because they don't answer many questions and they don't reveal many facts. But everyone just feels wonderful when they're in their presence, and they seem to be benevolent, but they're also withholding a lot of information. But they're alien. How do you figure this out? Everyone's still trying to work it out. Nobody knows. There's more about this in this big interview, 4-hour interview, that we haven't released yet, and I've got to do this in the next few days because this is now overdue. There's quite a lot that needs editing. We got cut off a number of times and had some problems and so on. The race that's subservient to them is a reptilian race. He said that their source believes that they suffered an extinction level event. They lost their planet. He says, this is their source. When I say he, I'm referring to their source. We haven't met them directly. We've been invited to meet them. We haven't met them. He says that the reptilians, all they want to do is to walk around. All they want to do is to walk around. They spend their life in big spaceships. They don't have a planet. Apparently, it fits. It sort of fits. What do they look like? He said, imagine a miniature T-Rex. Big teeth. A tail. Scales. They weigh 500 kilograms, 1,000 pounds. 2.5 meters tall. 8 feet high. They're very, very strong. They are a warrior race. They're highly intelligent. They're very ruthless. Another source of ours has described these beings as, imagine the instincts and the ethical level of responsibility of a crocodile, but with very high intelligence. You know, they don't think the way that humans do. And this, once again, going back to David Icke, what David Icke was saying just a couple of days ago, he also was referring to these beings as they, in his terminology, they operate through mind, they operate through a program, they will do whatever is expedient, they will do whatever is practical, they'll do whatever is in their own interests, and they don't have any empathy, they don't have any sympathy. It sort of fits, but behind all of that, and this is where we go back to what Ruth was saying, which is absolutely true, behind all of that, you've got some form of cycle of abuse that has made them into what they, these are tough kids on the block. We have children like that too, almost. Almost. Some of them. You don't want to come near them on a dark night. You'd be better off with a crocodile. Some of them, But behind them, they've experienced something that has made them into that. They've had a tough time, and this is their response. They're trying to survive in the world that they think is unsympathetic to them. This is just their response. They're trying to solve their own problem by being in a certain way. Maybe. These reptilian characters, he says that that the difference between them and a T-Rex is that if you remember what a T-Rex looks like, they've got these little vestigial sort of. These guys have got longer arms with very dexterous fingers, so they're tool makers. You see, if you think of the evolution of a biological species, you've got to go through the tool making phase. This is why dolphins haven't evolved high technology, because they can't make tools. They've got no fingers, they've got no hands. All they can do is make noises and play complicated games and swim around in the sea. They'll never be an industrial race or an electronic race, because you've got to go through that phase by making things. And they have been through this phase of making things. They're highly intelligent, they're highly able, post-industrial, they have space flight, they have the whole thing. And what I do not know is whether these are the same as the Anunnaki. What we do know about the Anunnaki, and I had a fascinating conversation with David Icke about this. I keep on talking about David Icke because he's a reference point that many people watching this video will recognize and be familiar with. And had a fascinating conversation with David. I was telling him all that we heard about the reptilians and the Anunnaki, and he was telling us, and it was absolutely matching totally. One of the characteristics is that when they are in contact, in physical contact, they will not reveal what they look like. They regard their appearance in a ritualistic way, or a way that has become ritualistic, as sacred. It's a little bit like you. It's part of their custom and ritual and fixed way of operating, that you cannot look at their face, or that we cannot look, or humans can't look on their face. It's not done. And Henry Deacon, Arthur Neumann, who has encountered these characters physically in the flesh, he never saw their faces because they're all wearing cloaks and headdresses and funny stuff like that. This is what they do. They're very ceremonial. It's an ancient culture which has ritual, and exactly as David, which has ritual deeply ingrained in everything which they do. Why not? They can do anything they like. They're aliens, you know. And when David Icke was describing how the ritual and the status and the sense of axiomatic importance that is ascribed to royalty, you know, the divine right of kings and all the rest of it, this all comes from the Anunnaki. This is how they regard themselves. And when you meet them, it's like meeting a king, or like meeting a queen. If we can imagine what it's like, you've got to talk in a certain way, you've got to avert your eyes, you've got to hold your hands in a certain way, you've got to approach them in a certain way, you've got to do everything in a certain way, you know. Otherwise, our source said, I don't think it was a joke. He said, if you don't do it right, you end up in the dinner plate. You know, it's like these, it's like there's a certain way that you go about all of this. You've got to defer to them. You've got to, you know. But what's really, really interesting is that if this is the same group as Clay and Sean Pickering are talking about, and they describe these guys in great detail, you know, you can see them when they're describing them. You know, they're describing them vividly. They are subservient to this silicon-based life form, and the hypothesis is that the silicon-based life form rescued them when they destroyed their planet. So somehow they're operating symbiotically. Everything that I've said here raises a huge number of questions, and I don't have the answers to them. I don't know whether these reptilians are shapeshifters. The silicon-based race, apparently they can shapeshift, but they don't shapeshift physically. They affect the perception in the brains or the minds of the people watching. So when this source, the first time that he came across one of these things, he was with a group of people, as I remember rightly, if I remember this correctly, he was with a group of people in a room, and he was announced that he was going to have an important meeting, and he went in there with these people in this room, and he was briefed by a senior military officer for 5 minutes, until the military officer then became this big crystal. Because it wasn't a military officer at all. They thought that they were, you know, they perceived a military officer. And what was really interesting is that all of those people in that group saw something slightly different, because this was a mental perception. They saw something, and then they were completely confused by this. They all went off into another room and compared, well, this is what I saw. What did you see? Well, he was wearing brown shoes. No, he wasn't. He was wearing black shoes. You know, he was 2 meters tall. No, he wasn't. He was quite short. You know, but they saw a person. And the rest of it was something to do with what they were sort of expecting. It was an individual response to something that they had been, that they were being evoked to see, or evoked to sense and hear. But they can only maintain it for about 5 minutes. Then they collapse into their real state, which is a physical state. The question immediately to their source was, well, is this some kind of a, you know, a hologram or an illusion or no, it's absolutely physical. They're a rock. They're a rock in a suit. You know, it's a really weird thing. He said, they're a rock. You know, you couldn't. So there's a big crystal thing. It's straight out of some bad science fiction movie. It's not what you expect, you know. But they have the capacity to influence how they're perceived for short periods of time. Fascinating stuff, absolutely fascinating. And the reptilians, if it's the same group of reptilians, are subservient to them. The Silicon-based group don't seem to hang around on planet Earth. They're out there somewhere, and nobody knows where they're from. This is another problem. They're not answering the question where they're from. I need to listen to the interview again, but I think the response is something like, you wouldn't understand, which isn't very helpful. You know, it may be true, but it's still not helpful. And there may be different branches of the reptilians, but the reptilians are a theme. They are a theme. They're coming up over and over again. There are people who've encountered them. There are people who've been contacted by them. There are people who've had experiences like Barbara Lamb had. There are the shape-shifting experiences. In our most recent interview with Jordan Maxwell, bless him, he came out saying, David Icke should not be persecuted for what people perceive as being his crazy ideas. He is absolutely right in what he said. Had the same reports, they're separate reports, and then he told this incredible story about this girl who had been left alone in the house in an American military base. Who she was, I mean, this is straight out of Hitchcock or something worse. You know, he's looking in the mirror, and behind him there's this reptilian being who steps out of the cupboard and starts gliding across the carpet towards her. You know, this is a 12-year-old, I think it is a young daughter of an American military officer, with guards around the house because this guy knew that there was some kind of a threat but didn't know what the threat was. And this thing came from a cupboard, you know. Left big scratch marks in the door, straight out of a bad movie, you know, and then disappeared. And this girl was completely freaked out. And David got this story from the girl, who is now a woman, telling us this happened on an American military base. These things happen all the time. They can't control it. Just stepping into a dimensional portal, they can control where they appear. This is why they appear in cupboards and funny places like this. Otherwise, they pop in the middle of a cocktail party. That doesn't work. So, you know, or in the middle of the street, or in the middle of a shopping mall. You know, no, they always appear in cupboards and things, or little corners, or basements, or you know, they can control where they appear when they do appear. And the rest of the time, they're here manipulating one of the chess pieces on this chessboard, which is a prominent figure whose role it is to influence other people. So it's a perfect strategy. This is why some of them are politicians. This is why some of them are industrialists. They're probably in the media, and they're probably in UFO research. You know, if I was a reptilian with an agenda like that, that's exactly the pieces that I would occupy. It makes perfect sense, and it makes for a great movie.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Okay.
So tell me, are they actually eating the children?
Some people say so. In Bill Deagle's 2006 Granada Forum lecture, there's a part where he says, I could tell you what they do, but I'm not going to because I'd fall apart, he says. Bill Deagle's a good man. He couldn't talk about what he knew. He couldn't talk about what he knew. He was in the middle of a presentation. Henry Deacon, Arthur Neumann, told us that in his place of work, in his classified place of work, we know where that is, he was, know where that was, he attended a briefing all about this subject. And he walked out of the briefing because he couldn't stomach it. And he told us he was amazed at two things. One of them, he was amazed at how everyone was just sitting there listening to this and taking notes. And he was also amazed that nobody stopped him from walking out. That's all he told us.
What did they tell him?
He was hinting heavily. He, like many people who've got, like many insiders who've got something important to say, he will talk indirectly about it. And the way that he alerted us to this story was, we were sitting in a restaurant with him, talking about all of this stuff. We spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours with him. Met him on many, many occasions, and we'd often meet him for dinner. And he was making a reference to a short story a short science fiction story which I read many years ago, and I can't remember if it was by Philip K. Dick or it was by Heinlein or whoever it was, but the title of the story was To Serve Man. To Serve Man. This is the story. I know that. And it was a little bit of a silly short story. And most science fiction short stories are about 12 pages long, and they're quite fun, and they've got a little punchline, and you've got maybe 20 of them in a book. And this story is called To Serve Man, and the theme was these aliens had appeared, and it had been discovered that in some document that somebody had seen of them, that there's this document that said to serve man, and people were saying, oh, this is great, they'll come here to serve us, they'll come here to help us, to assist us, it actually turned out that what it really meant, they were going to serve us up on a plate. I mean, it's a very bad play on words. And Henry Arthur was making pointed references to this as he looked at the menu of this meal. And I didn't get it, and Kerry didn't get it. We didn't really get what he was talking about. And he kept on, he was becoming more and more pointed, until he virtually had to spell it out for us. And when he realized that we'd understood that there were at least some of these aliens who were eating people, then he said, okay, I don't need to talk about that anymore. And this seems to be, it seems to be a theme. And one of the problems in this whole research area is that, and it's also the problem with the president of any country going out towards the press and saying, oh yeah, Roswell was real. It's like after half an hour or 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks, someone then starts asking the question, well, we've heard about this, is this true? You see, and it goes to unsavory places. It goes to places that you don't want to go. Our research takes us to these places. Our research takes us to what the Illuminati are doing, to what's happening in the Vatican, to what the reptilians are doing, to extremely nasty places where I don't want to go to those places. It doesn't feel like fun anymore, really, when you're looking at all this stuff. You think, oh God, I don't want to, deal with this stuff. It's not nice. But if one is going to be a really, really honest researcher, you've got to follow the data trail. And this is what David Icke does. This is what Bill Deagle does. It's not what everybody does. Some people say, I'm not going to go there. I'm only going to talk about, nice aliens. Or I'm only going to talk about earth changes. I'm not going to talk about aliens at all. Or I'm only going to talk about what the politicians are doing or what the economy is doing. But if you look at it from a high enough place, you see that all of these things are interconnected. Even the nasty stuff. And this is where, again, when you go back to David's opening statement and Ruth's opening statement, that if you hold that line, that we are infinitely capable, infinitely wonderful, infinitely beautiful spiritual beings, and all else is illusion, drama, and play, Maya, then you can handle it. Because it's like, okay, it doesn't feel very nice, but it's just one of those things in a dream that just feels a bit, and then you move on. It's the only really way to handle it. How you communicate about it to people who don't have that viewpoint, I don't know.